Hello everyone, this is Divine Erdrick, and finally, no more complaining, no more controversies for now. It's time to fanboy. With the current controversies being what they were, I didn't feel comfortable doing this, but internet being the internet, and the AAA industry being the AAA industry, there's already a new controversy, and most people have moved on to that. So I think I can finally start talking about this. And since my secret project is not ready to be revealed yet, in fact, I've run into a little bit of a snag there, and there's a new content patch coming out right around the corner, literally I think next Thursday. It's next Thursday or Friday? Next Friday. It is time to talk about what may be my favorite video game of all time. It is definitely the game I've spent more time playing recently than any other game, Path of Exile. So some of you might have heard about this game, or might at least be distantly aware of it. But for those of you who don't know, Path of Exile is an isometric action RPG in the style of games like Diablo, Sacred, Fate, and Torchlight. It was created by a small studio named Grinding Gear Games. Just three college buddies, actually that kind of sounds familiar. Three college buddies getting their resources together to make the game that they wanted to make. They're based out of New Zealand, which actually figures quite heavily into Path of Exile's style and story. But they were all passionate fans of some of the more hardcore action RPGs, such as Diablo 2, and so they wanted to design a game that was the action RPG they wanted to play, and Path of Exile is that game. This is an action RPG with a very distinct, dark, and gothic feel. It has a very unique world. It's an exceptionally difficult game. It's definitely not an easy game or the quote-unquote casual game. You'll need to put a lot of time and effort into the game in order to see the most reward, but it is absolutely worth it, and it is free. And I'm not talking like fake free. I am not talking, oh, you can play it for free, but you're going to want to spend money if you want to do well in the game. No, this game is genuinely free. For the low cost of just some download bandwidth, you get a full 10-act RPG with a full endgame and 7 characters. Pretty freaking impressive, right? Even the amount of stuff you get that you can purchase, that you might consider worth purchasing, is very generous. So you get 24 character slots. Yeah, 24. You would think with 7 character classes, they'd only give you 7 slots, but no, you get 24 slots to play with as you like. You get 4 stash tabs, shared stash tabs between all of your characters on each individual league that you can use to store the gear and currency that you want to store. And when it comes to how the game is financed, when it comes to the microtransactions, it's probably the best microtransaction system I have ever seen. So right off the bat, like almost all of the things that I absolutely hate about microtransactions are gone. The whole, hey, buy $200 worth of currency in order to get the best deal. No, that's not there. There are no discounts or deals on currency. It is a flat transaction to convert your money to Path of Exile's currency point system. The sales are on the items themselves. They are frequent and they're generous. And when those sales do happen, are you bombarded by these constant banners? No, you get a little banner at the beginning of your login screen, and then every so often a small little yellow message pops up in the text message section of the screen to say, oh, by the way, there's a sale going on. Now, one thing some people might be concerned about when it comes to Path of Exile's microtransactions is the existence of loot boxes. Does Path of Exile have loot boxes? And yes, Path of Exile does have loot boxes. In fact, it's had them for longer than most of the AAA industry has. But these are loot boxes the way they were intended to be done. Random grab bags of microtransactions for your enjoyment. Every one of them is reasonably cost. They are completely optional. There's no constant nagging of, hey, you should get these loot boxes. Everything you can get in a loot box, you know exactly what your odds and percentage of getting those items are. And if you don't want to get them in the loot boxes, everything eventually goes up on the storefront and you can just buy the items you wanted to begin with. So yeah, that's the way loot boxes should be done, and Path of Exile does it. Really, there's basically only a single microtransaction for Path of Exile that you could at all consider a bit of a, cash grab by GGG, and that is the premium stash tabs that they have available for sale. These stash tabs are honestly extremely useful, but most importantly, you need a premium stash tab in order to gain access to any of the automated trading sites. You can still trade via in-game and on the forum without having them, but if you really want to get involved in the trading community, you're going to need at least one of these premium stash tabs. And that's basically it. That's the only real kind of money grab GGG has gone after in this game. And even then, they have a stash tab sale every month. So after you get a handful of points, you can literally just wait for a premium stash tab to go on sale, grab one, and now you have access to online trading through the automated trading sites. And that's only if you care about that. You actually don't have to trade in this game, although I really do highly recommend it. There is a mode in this game called Solo Self-Found for the hardest of the hardcore. Well, actually, I guess technically for the hardest of the hardcore, there is hardcore Solo Self-Found. Even the hardcore mode I find really interesting, because instead of destroying your character when it dies, it instead bumps your character into standard league, so you no longer can gain progression or achievements with that character in hardcore, but at the same time, all of the loot and experience you've earned isn't wasted, therefore encouraging you to try more of the hardcore experience, knowing that essentially you're just playing this other mode where you can attempt to get further and further in the game each time you try. Now, I'd mentioned a little bit about Path of Exile's world, and really it's one of the more original worlds out there. So it is a mostly human world. There really aren't any non-human humanoids in this game. There are certain forces that are humanoid, but everything seems to be derived from the same basic core humanity that exists in this world. It's also very heavily inspired by New Zealand's own mythology and lore, particularly that of the native culture. And one of the races you can play in the game through the Marauder class is actually based on the New Zealand native culture, and you have the religion and the gods that, because of this unique influence, allow Path of Exile to have a different world than I think most of us have seen. But probably the coolest thing about Path of Exile is, even though you have these dark forces that you face in the game. You know, you have antagonists and villains and horrible creatures. Probably the main antagonist of the game, the main driving force of Path of Exile, is actually the world itself, the continent of Rayclast. This dark, cursed continent that seems to just attract tragedy and darkness and chaos. This continent that has already had two great empires rise on it and then be destroyed by cataclysms of the corruption that seeped into their societies. And with every new content patch, we're learning more about Rayclast and learning more about the dark forces that have gathered around it, about these, forces in the creation of these old gods, and all of these potential threats that exist along the periphery that we have to face as heroes on Rayclast. And essentially the story of the game is that you are a criminal exiled from the civilized land of Oriath. That's where the name of the game comes from, the Path of Exile. And this idea exists even though exile to Rayclast is basically known as a death sentence. But if you can be successful on Rayclast, if you can work hard and conquer the threats there in the name of Oriath, you can earn your way back to civilized life. And of course, that's not how things go, but I won't spoil anything about how the campaign turns. Now, one of the reasons why I think Path of Exile doesn't have as many players, despite the fact that it's a free game, despite the fact it's in a very popular gameplay style, and the fact that there's recently still been a push lately for more players to come over and experience it, is that it does have a very steep learning curve. And Grinding Gear Games has been trying to add new tutorials and new message systems to help bring players into the game and overcome this initial hurdle of the learning curve. So initially, when you first load up Path of Exile, the game doesn't look too totally complicated. You basically have 7 classes to choose from, and with the exception of the Scion, they're all pretty much cut and dry as to what the intention behind the class is. You've got the Marauder, who is obviously intended to be your up-close and personal melee bruiser. You've got your Ranger, who's meant to be your bow and agility and hit-and-run character. You've got your Witch, who is intended to be the primary spellcaster. And then in between those 3 core classes, you have a Templar, who is a mix of melee might and magical might. The Shadow, who is a mix of skill-based combat, hit-and-run tactics, and magical expression. And then you have the Duelist, which is a mix of strength-based melee attacks and high-skill combat techniques. And then when you first get into the game and you open up your character sheet, there doesn't seem to actually be all that much really that you haven't seen in other games before. You've got a 3-stat system instead of a 4-stat system like a lot of other games like to use, where everything is derived off of just strength, dexterity, intelligence. And then you've got a lot of the common things that you're used to seeing in other games. You've got your attack rate percentage, you've got your resistances. You open up your inventory and it's a classic paper doll with the grid-based inventory management system. Everything starts off standard. And then you get your first skill gems, and then you start to see the first really cool potential of this game. And this whole idea that you socket these skill gems FF7 style into your equipment, linking up different skills with different support gems to do different things, and you start to realize, oh wow, I can do all these kind of cool things with these skills. So how do I determine what skills I can use and how good I am? And then you open up the passive skill tree and bam! Skill Drossel. And this seemingly impenetrable puzzle of spheres in the way that Final Fantasy X kind of did their sphere grid, but with even less seeming cohesion or guidance to it, where you've got 2 starting points at minimum for each character and even more for the Scion. And you've got all of these abilities to link your characters together, and then you find out, wait, no, it's not like the sphere grid. Once you've unlocked any given passive in this tree, you can unlock any passive connected to it, so you can take any route at any time in any direction you want as you level up. And players' heads explode. But the thing is not only are there so many tools available for you to use in order to learn how to use this skill tree so that you can take the full advantage of it. My favorite is a tool called Path of Building. I can literally spend just hours tinkering with builds in this. That is how good the build system in Path of Exile is. That's how interesting it is and how fun it is to try to plan and develop your builds. I can just spend hours trying to fine-tune my builds and find the best paths to get to the best passive nodes. But when you actually do just start to really get into the game and learn how Skill Drossel works, a lot of it makes perfect sense, and you kind of begin to innately know where you need to look, even if you haven't downloaded the tools or done any kind of research on it. You know, you've got your Marauder as the core of your strength-based character, so around the Marauder, you know, going into the Templar and down into the Duelist, you've got all of your passive melee and weapon nodes, and you've got tons of life nodes to increase your survivability. You know, you look around the Witch, and that's where you see all of your elemental capabilities, your primary elemental nodes. You know, you go over to the Ranger, and that's where you get your projectile and your crit nodes and your dodge chance nodes and things like that. So even though it may look like a lot to begin with, it actually is really easy to understand once you actually start figuring out how it works. They've even got all of the nodes grouped together into these spherical clusters that kind of help you understand where you want to go. And in most cases, it's usually a pretty smart move where if you're trying to increase something for your build, to just head to the nearest cluster around that idea and take all of the nodes there. And eventually, yeah, you'll want to start learning how to fine-tune that and know which of the nodes and which clusters you want to grab. And eventually you'll also start to notice that the most important thing about going through the tree is grabbing what are called the notable passives, these larger spheres within Skill Drossel that have all of these different capabilities that your character gains for grabbing them. And so you'll want to start learning the best and fastest ways to get to the particular notables that will help your character the fastest and give the best impact as soon as possible. And then, eventually, you'll want to start tinkering with some of the keystone nodes, which are these really big nodes that are designed to actually change how your character plays in reference to the game. From simple things like making sure you always hit in exchange for giving up critical hits, to having special abilities involving life drain while losing the ability to naturally recover your life, to having different elements weaken your opponents so that if you can hit with different elements in different order, you'll do even more damage. all of these nodes have different ways to truly customize your character. And once you combine those with the unique items you can find, the ascendancies you can earn through Izaro's trials within the labyrinths, you just get so much you can do with your character, and it's so fun and so satisfying to develop a character in this game. But of course, what good is a really cool character that you've spent all this time learning and developing if you don't have an enjoyable endgame experience to take advantage of with it? Path of Exile's Atlas system is such an experience. After clearing the 10 acts of the story, you gain access to the Atlas of Worlds, a means to explore all kinds of different realities hovering around Rayclast, with each of them being unique locations with specialized loot, bosses, and enemies and encounters that you can take advantage of using the ability to modify the maps you find to those locations the way you can any other item in the game. And all of it with the end goal of facing an incredibly difficult boss encounter at the core of the Atlas. So you are never just building your character for the purpose of just trying to get stronger and stronger. There's always another challenge to overcome. And for those of you who like the kind of infinite dungeon or infinite progression systems that games like Diablo 3 have, that's here too now with the Delve system, allowing you to delve deeper and deeper under the continent of Rayclast in search of even greater rewards, even better loot, to see just how far down you can go with the character that you've designed. And then, to make all of this even better, you have this incredible itemization system with this extremely satisfying risk-reward currency system that innately tends to rebalance itself, so the currency in the game manages to keep fairly consistent values from league to league, so that you can actually try to create that perfect item that you need in order to be as successful as you want to be in the game. And then on top of all that, GGG is constantly releasing new builds and new patches and new content for you to experience. And every quarter, roughly, there's a new challenge league that allows you to try to start from scratch with a new build and new game content to explore, to see how far, how fast, and how quickly you can get through Path of Exile's content, to see how good of a player and character builder you really are. And again, it's all free. Like, legitimately free. It's so much fun, so satisfying to build. And if any of you are interested in playing the game, I'm going to include some links in the description and in the top pinned comment for some of my favorite Path of Exile YouTubers who create lots of information and guides in order to get started into the game. And then on top of that, if you really like, because, well, at this point I can say this since I've only got a handful of subscribers, if you're at all interested, please feel free to PM me either here on my Twitter account or on my Tumblr account. I love creating and playing support characters. I'm very curious to see how parties interact with all of the new Delve content and the random dungeonization that goes on. And of course we're going to have new Atlas maps coming out soon, with the new content about to drop, with new crafting mechanics, a new plot system to try to customize the rewards you get as you explore the game, and new masters and new master questing, this is going to be a great time to pick up Path of Exile. So I highly recommend playing this game. Again, free. Just download it. Give it a try. Even if you don't feel like ever giving GGG any of your money, you at least owe it to yourself to give it a try, play through the initial campaign, see if you enjoy the end game at all, see if you can find all of the fun and enjoyment that comes from being able to tinker and create your own builds with Skill Drossel. I'll have some tool links in the top pinned comment and in the description below, and I really do hope all of you will give this game a try, and that I can honestly say that this has been Divine Erdrick, and I will see you all on the Cursed Continent of Rayclast.